what Beethoven do you like? What pumped you up?
Well, when I was a kid, one of the first albums, I was first kind of raised on classical music. Then I got into jazz and rock and everything. But I got a collection of his 9 symphonies. And God, there's a kind of an aggression and violence, like to the 5th Symphony and the 9th Symphony. It just kind of, like they used in Clockwork Orange. There's something so overwhelmingly powerful about it, right? It just, you can't.
The choral section in the 9th is like that. It's so
the Ode
powerful.
to Joy.
Yeah, and it's so, isn't that so interesting that the Ode to Joy has that primal aggressive force, and it makes joy. It makes joy is, in the naive sense, it's, well, you're happy. It's like, no, this joy is that integrated, terrible power that you definitely hear in superb music.
Yeah, yeah.
And when that choral bit kicks in, it's just overwhelming. It's like a blow and
makes you tingle. It's so exciting. And I've heard it maybe 1,000 times since then, and it still affects me the same way. And now when I'm driving somewhere and I have to get myself in the mood, I'll still put the 9th Symphony on. And some of the other ones work as well.
It's like encountering the terrible force of good. You think about Moses in the burning bush, or Jacob wrestling with God. It's like, well, why is it a burning bush? Why is it terrifying? Why do you wrestle with God? Why do you get hurt? It's like, well, because good in its full force has this unbelievable, it has this integration of power. And it's no wonder it terrifies people, because it just burns everything away in comparison.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the new book that I'm writing about, which is the Sublime, as I'm talking about, it's a combination of 2 emotions of both kind of pain and pleasure, of excitement and fear at the same time. So you're confronting something that kind of intimidates you, but is so awesome that you can't, you're just overwhelmed. And the confluence of 2 emotions, opposing emotions at the same time, is very, very powerful for a human being.
Yeah, I've just written a book that I'm going to publish next year that's called An ABC of Childhood Tragedy, and it's a combination of dark humor and beauty. It's the same. We're experimenting with exactly the same thing, that paradoxical juxtaposition of dark and light emotions. There is something sublime about that, and something awe-inspiring about that. I guess it's part of bringing what's dark into the light, or subsuming it under the light, maybe. So why the Sublime? What are you pursuing there? And what's
the reason? The ultimate in Sublime is, to me, so the way I look at it is, being a human being and being socialized is a kind of a world. There's a limit, a circle that we have to live inside, certain codes and conventions that we have to abide by, and we all do that. And the codes and conventions for 5th century BC China are not the same as what we have now, but there's still that limit. And what humans are attracted to what lies beyond that limit. It's just part of our nature. It's a first part of it. And when we explore beyond the social limits and codes and things we're supposed to do and ways we're supposed to act, it's deeply exciting and thrilling. But there's also that element of fear involved, right?
See, I think that's a better, what would you call it, formulation than Nietzsche's idea of will to power, is the desire to exist on that sublime edge. And that is the border between order and chaos that you're describing, right? You want, and the thing, and that is the source of meaning itself. I mean, that's why I think music is so powerful, is because it plays with predictable forms, but continually adds that level of unpredictability, a beautiful, you know how in any kind of music, the simplest music, someone who's good at it, country music, there'll be a key shift or a twang on the string or something that...
Or something discordant.
Yes, exactly. And then and integrated within sort of a higher unity. And it's deeply meaningful. It puts you on that edge of the sublime. And we do find the meaning that helps sustain us in life exactly at that place. That's something more deeply real than anything else.
Well, so and sort of the ultimate thing beyond that limit is death itself. And the word sublime means up to the threshold of a door, or sublimin, limin being the limit.
Right, like and subliminal.
And so I've been meaning to write this book for 15 years, and I got distracted. But then about 3 years ago, I nearly died myself. I had a stroke. And I came, just an inch away from dying myself. I was driving my car. And so some of the experience, the near-death experience, and what it kind of taught me and how it sort of remained with me 3 years later, and how I kind of feel it in my bones, and how it's altered how I look at the world and everything around me, is to me the kind of the ultimate sublime experience. So now, unfortunately, I'm able to write about this in a way that's actually very personal and experiential instead of just purely intellectual. And
why, unfortunately? Because of the price you had to pay for it?
Yeah, the price is I can't take a walk. I can't do the swim. I can't do the things that I used to love. So, I'm kind of, I can, I'm functional. I can walk around the house, but I can't take a hike, and I can't do my long distance swimming or my mountain biking or anything like that. So I paid a price, but I'm alive.
Yeah, well, and it was so interesting that it was in the aftermath of that devastating experience that you decided to turn particularly to the sublime.
Yeah. Well, it's because I've been wanting to write the book for a long time, and I knew that it has to do a little bit with the feeling of death, and
I don't understand that. So why make that as, I'm not disputing it. I just don't understand. Like, I mean, you talked also about 50 Cent's brush with death, but why does the sublime, in your estimation, why is it tangled up with the idea of death?
Well, because there's a that limit, and experiencing the limit gives you that sense of excitement and fear at the same time. Well, death is the ultimate limit. And to have gone up to that door and glimpsed to the other side and literally felt it in your bones and literally feel your bones melting away as you kind of go into a coma, is like, I went up to that door. I actually peered inside of it. Now, other people have had much stronger near-death experiences. Mine was more of the milder sort, but still, I peered.
as far as near-death experiences go, it was relatively minor.
Well, my coma lasted an hour or something. Some people, they're
that's nothing, man. Experts, they have comas for like 3 years.
Well, okay, all right. I could have had a more intense near-death experience, but it was pretty intense.
Yeah, it sounds like it was sufficient.
It is, but so the sense of life is almost too much. It's overpowering in its immediacy, and we humans try and kind of dull the razor edge so much so that we can live. But if you think about your mortality on a day-to-day basis, and if you try and actually experience the immediacy of life and how dangerous it actually is, and how it's fraught with all of these things that you don't want to confront, is very, very, very powerful. And I'm sorry, Siri just keeps hearing me. I'm so annoying. So it creates. So when you have that, it's like the ultimate. It's a mix of they call in French the orgasm le petit mort, right? Right. So an orgasm is almost like a little death, So that sense of it's almost too much, it's almost like death itself, like something so pleasurable can actually kind of morph into something a little bit frightening as well. Something a little bit like you're exploring something that you're not supposed to be exploring.
You see that in the ease in which laughter and tears can be interchanged, right? You see that with children. They can switch from laughter to tears in no time. And, you can laugh so hard that you cry. And it's often, too, when you're crying about something sorrowful that someone can say something funny and it'll switch to laughter. And that's all way down at the level of instinct, right? Where these... Right. And it's so interesting to see the opposites touch at that level.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm doing the Eleusinian mysteries, just to bring that back, is I have a chapter on pagan religions, on what I call the pagan sublime. And I'm trying to tell the reader that we don't have a right conception of ancient religions. They're actually very different from what we think. We have these kind of cliched notions of kind of mischievous gods cavorting in clouds and doing all kinds of naughty things that are very human, and just kind of almost a silliness to it, like, whoa, we're so beyond that. But actually, pagan religions were extremely serious, and they were based on creating, go away, Siri. And they were based on creating very powerful emotional responses in people. And that was what primal religion was about, or ancient religion was about. It wasn't based on texts, on dogma, on the written word. So the Eleusinian mysteries, because there are mysteries, because nobody ever wrote about it, there's no text, there's nothing written that we can go to. Yes, there's the hymn to Demeter that kind of maybe describes a little bit of what it's based on, but we don't know really what happened because nothing was ever written down. It was simply about creating this overwhelming emotional reaction in which you took the initiates to the edge of death. You made them experience death in life, which is the story of Demeter and Persephone. You were like making them feel as if they had gone into the underworld itself. And that created a whole new relationship to life. But I wanted this idea that religion isn't this kind of milk toasty thing that people think about nowadays. It was initially an extremely powerful reaction to human vulnerability, to our weakness in this immense cosmos with all of these very powerful forces. And the religious rituals were to actually mirror that and give you a kind of compensatory sense that you could control it, you could contain it within these kind of powerful experiences.
No, it's really interesting to me that, you know, you've come through your analysis of the darkness, and then a consequence of that was to be motivated to pursue the sublime. You know, it's in the little stamp that I'm using for these kids' book, which I'm doing with this illustrator named Juliette Fogra, who's a real genius in my estimation. We made a stamp, and the motto on the stamp is "Through the darkness into the light." And,
wow.
You know, and there's this old idea that if you look into the darkness enough, you'll find something that compensates for it, right? And that emerges out of the darkness that's greater and more powerful than the darkness. And that part of the looking into the dark side of yourself is you find the power that enables you to deal with mortality. And there is something sublime about that. It's so cool that, you know, all your work investigating and trying to integrate the shadow has led you to this what that your intuition has been gripped by the idea of the sublime. It isn't necessarily where you'd think you'd end up.
Well, yeah, a lot of the impetus for the book is another little bit of anger as well, because I always have to have some anger in order to feel the impulse to write and to discipline myself. And my anger now is about how people's worlds have become so tight and so banal and so limited, where they're just kind of disappearing into their phones, and their world is just sort of programmed for them by Facebook or social media, and they're sort of told what they're supposed to think, and they're kind of programmed. And at the same time, you know, what science is discovering about the universe and about where we live and about who we are is just so insanely mind-blowing. It's just absolutely it's sublime, in my opinion. And yet so many people are just living like as if they're sleepwalking, as if that, you know, I talk in one chapter about the unlikeliness of any of us being alive, any of us actually being here right now on Earth, and how just to be who we are, the odds against it are like 8 trillion to 1. I mean, even more than that. But people aren't thinking about this. They're not aware of the awesomeness of just the fact of being alive, of the cosmos as it evolved, as things on Earth evolve the way they are. And so I'm kind of angry a little bit about how people are just not aware of this.
That anger, again, that's, you know, one of the things I did as a clinician is to help people find their purpose was to help them find out what they're angry about. It's like, well, what's your problem? You know, you say that to someone, what's your problem? But actually you want to know. It's like, because if you have a problem, then, because there's lots of things you could be bothered about, but you're not bothered about by all of them.
Right.
There's something that stands out for you as, you know, something that violates your sense of moral propriety, let's say. That's your problem. You think, well, I don't want to have a problem. It's, yes, you do. You want to have your problem, and then you want to go try to solve it. And if you're looking for meaning in your life, it's like, well, what bugs you? Well, I'm annoyed at this and that. And you know, it's pretty naive and low resolution and formulaic to begin with, but you could zero right in on that, and then you find the purpose of your life. And that's it. That's in that anger. It's in that anger, at least to some degree.
Yeah, and as I said, I can't write without it. I don't know why. Every day I have to feel a little bit of pinch of it, or like a little bit of edge of that knife in me. And sometimes,
yeah, well, you have to be. That's right. I mean, I find when I'm sitting down to write a chapter, because it's hard to sit down and write a chapter. It's a lot of work, man. And, writers always whine about that, but it's hard to do. It's as hard as clinical work, which is the hardest work I ever did. And so, but I have to be, it's like, there has to be a reason for this, to get me going to do it. It has to be important. And that means it has to be dealing with something weighty. And if it's weighty, it's going to call out of you all of your emotional responses, including including anger. Certainly that's a tremendous form of energy.
Well, I don't know if you have the same experience, but I read so many books for my research, et cetera. And that's the main thing that I fault them with. There's no kind of energy behind it. There's no human behind it. There's no voice that's kind of screaming out why they have to say this.
Screaming out is exactly right. That's a great book, Screams. Like Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. That's like 3,000 pages of screaming anger. It's like you sustained screaming anger for 3,000 pages. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's like being caught in a windstorm reading that book.
Yeah.
And that's no wonder that greatness is terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of channeling the dark side in some ways. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that man brought down a totalitarian state, at least in part. It's like you have to have a lot of force, and you think that there's not going to be anger in part to push back against. That's all that kind of petty tyranny that you were talking about in its most, what would you say, most rigidified and universal form. And one man, who decided he was going to tell the truth and harnessed that passion to his words, changed the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if I'll have that kind of effect. I'm sure I won't, but that's sort of, I want people to, I kind of want to spark a sense of almost the religious awe without an organized religion behind it. Because I think we have changed a lot in thousands of years, but there's something in our nature that kind of craves those kinds of experiences, and nothing in our culture is providing it.
It's the definition of crave. I don't think nothing. Music does.
Yeah.
Music does, man. Music does. And that music was such a mystery for me when I was a young psychologist. Like, music is meaningful, and you can't argue the meaning away. Like, it's invulnerable to criticism. Isn't that so cool that there's a source of meaning that's invulnerable to criticism? And then it's this harmonious interplay of beautiful patterns, predictability and unpredictability, and the integration of passion and movement, right? Because it compels movement. Think of people dancing to a Strauss waltz, right? They're harmonizing themselves with the sublime patterns of the world. That's music.
Right.
It's something, man. And it's no wonder young people are so desperate for music, because that's where we have the sublime in our culture.
Well, that's where they go to things like raves or astral world and concerts like that. They want that kind of collective experience, that you used to get from like initiation rituals or kind of things in pagan times. I remember once I was in Nicaragua. I was a journalist. I was covering the revolution, the civil war going on. And the Pope was visiting Nicaragua at the time. It's 1984, I believe. And there was like 100,000 people crammed in this one square. And, I'm not by any means a Sandinista. I had no sympathy for it, particularly as it is now. But the feeling was that I've never experienced anything else like it, of that crowd and that group emotion. It can be frightening too.
Then we can think about like. Well, that's it. That's the thing. The Nazis were unbelievably good at bringing that up, right? And so you might say too that if we can't figure out how to harness that force in a positive way in our culture, we pretend it doesn't exist. It's going to come up in these underground ways because the craving for it is so deep. And the Nazis were masters of spectacle and fire. They were really good at that sort of thing. And Orwell was courageous enough to point that out. He said, well, we don't have anything with that power to combat that terrible, dramatic evil. But you do see it in a concert. You do see it in that collective. Well, you said you saw it in relationship to the Pope. And hopefully that's something good. Or at least it's certainly a lot better than Nuremberg.
Yeah.
And to think
I mean,
that we don't need that, or that that's just superstition, that's
oh, I
extraordinarily
know.
naive. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know. I know.
Yeah.
I agree.